Hated a Mormon girl.
The notorious Mormon stereotype is how nice they are.
Smile. Smile right now. Smile. Smile a little bit. Come on, break the corners of your mouth. You right here. That's better. You just look better when you're smiling.
You could say that killing them with kindness is how they defend their beliefs and fight criticism, but it's not a valiant effort of an intellectual conversation on the absurdity of their religion. I guess creating distance from traditional Joseph Smith Mormonism is through various denominations and sects. It's easy to circumvent criticism when you say you are different than that, but when your founder was a literal cult leader with 40 wives and a knack for fantasy writing, don't expect people to take you seriously.
And for those of you who were a little confused, you are dead, and this is hell. So abandon all hope and yada yada yada. We're now going to start the orientation process, which will last about... Hey, wait a minute, I shouldn't be here. I was a totally strict and devout Protestant. I thought we went to heaven. Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong. I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness. You picked the wrong religion as well. Well, who was right? Who gets it?
Mormonism.
I'm afraid it was the Mormons. Yes, the Mormons are the correct answer.
Oh. That was good. Oh, God. The Cult of Osho. Yeah, this guy was nuts. Oh, God. It reminds me of the opening of OK I, right? OK I. That's such a weird opening. OK I is such a cool one. OK I, right? I think, oh yeah, OK I's Weird Stories. Fucking amazing. The King of Stolen Valor. Like how he starts his videos like this. It's like, OK I. It's so weird. Oh, he didn't start it. Oh well. Maybe it was at the end, but yeah, it's a really good way to start a video. Reminds me of that. This guy was fucked. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, Rajneesh wasn't that bad, but he was pretty bad. Osho was an interesting story.
In 1981, an orange jumpsuited horde swarmed an inconspicuous county in hopes of finding a home where they could practice a new faith and worship their foreign, illustrious leader. On the outside, it appears as if a band of wanderers were building a civilization from nothing, with plans of changing the minds and lives of all of those to come. A cult that, to this day, holds the keys to the meaning of life and what it is to be human. Those most dedicated to the orange garb chose to reside upon a land of free love, preaching that to become enlightened, one must overcome their worries, reject jealousy, avoid greed, and renounce vice. Inspired by one man, hippies all around the world flocked to his word and found solace in his steps to clear their consciousness and free thy inner self. But why him? Hundreds of contemporary gurus or prophets have come forward promising to usher humanity into a new age, yet ultimately fail in their mission to produce a large enough following. Is the problem the guru, their followers, or a combination of both? Well, with a bit of luck and some questionable noses behind closed doors, a curious child nicknamed the Ruler of the Night would grow up to encourage thousands on a path of individuality and total freedom, securing him wealth, infamy, and a dedicated mass of followers from all walks of life to this day. Except, nothing is ever this simple, and utopias will never exist. Dressed in sunrise colors and grinning from ear to ear, this bloodthirsty collection of lost souls put a stranglehold on an
Bloodthirsty collection of lost souls.
and committed the largest bioterrorism attack in American history.
Oh, God.
All for the sake of pleasing their godlike false prophet, an ambitious stranger that would come to be known as Osho, the sex guru.
Now, this guy was really bad. I'm thinking of
on December
the other
11th,
guy.
1931, in a small small village named Kuchwada. His birth name was
Agro.
Chandra Mohan Jain, but for clarification, he would go by several different names throughout his life. He was called Raja until the age of 7, and then Rajneesh Mohan Chandra Jain in preliminary school, but dropped the Jain in college, as he stopped believing in Jainism. During his early teachings, he was known as Acharya Rajneesh, or Bhagwan Shri Rajneesh. Acharya meaning teacher, Bhagwan meaning God, Lord, or Blessed One. For roughly a month in 1988, he renamed himself Maitreya the Buddha, or beloved Zorba. The following year, he was called Shri Rajneesh, which soon became Osho Rajneesh. Finally, in September of 1989, he settled on his final name, Osho. For the sake of continuity and everyone's mental stability, instead of Rajneesh...
I'm thinking of the Bhagwan. The Bhagwan wasn't that bad. The Rajneesh was the really... But this guy was fucked.
or Bhagwan, we will stick with Osho throughout the story. Though, it is important to recognize that these names act as a layer of separation to differentiate between his motives and how he wanted to be perceived. In any case, before Osho had any of these names, he was just another little boy running around India's Raisen district. As one of 11 siblings, Osho was sent to live with his maternal grandparents, which he credits as being a major influence on his development. By Osho's own account, his grandmother did not impose any type of parental restrictions, leading to a rather carefree and spirited childhood for him. After his grandfather's death, 8-year-old Osho moved to Gadarwara to live with his parents, about an hour-and-a-half drive from his place of birth. Death seemed to follow Osho at a young age. Soon after his grandfather's death, his childhood girlfriend passed at the age of 15 from typhoid. These events had a profound impact on him, resulting in a persistent fear of death that consumed most of his adolescence, possibly influencing his later teachings. During his school years, Osho was a talented student who held a reputation as a fierce debater, despite being remembered as disobedient. He developed a critical attitude towards organized religion and proved to have a keen interest in a variety of techniques to expand consciousness. A fancy way of saying, he created unique variations of fasting, meditation, hypnosis, and yogic exercises. It's believed Osho preferred to read rather than partake in sports, which led him to become enraptured by the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, German philosophers known as the fathers of Marxism. Author Vasant Joshi in The Awakened One states Osho, along with some friends, built a library containing mostly communist literature. Thus, Osho and his friends formed a small band of young thinkers who opposed religion and favored communist ideology in its place. This didn't bode all too well, as Osho would be branded a communist by his peers, which he didn't refute and was nearly expelled from school. As confirmation, Osho himself once claimed, "I've been interested in communism from my very childhood. Communist literature, perhaps, there is no book that is missing from my library. First, I was deeply interested in communism, but finding that it is a corpse, I became interested in anarchism. No state, no government in the world." For someone who was not even old enough to take a leader in the States, Osho held a fiery passion for critical thought and sought a way to lessen humanity's suffering. He saw religions and governments as a means of holding back the people, who, in his mind, should be free to do whatever they choose, no matter the cost. Clearly, the so-called humanitarians that came before him did an awful job in helping the masses, so it was time for Osho to stand and assume a mantle of responsibility. In turn, he cultivated romanticized goals of saving humanity from its woes, in the hopes of delivering his followers from conventional sin, while advocating for a respite, or haven, where physical and mental bliss reigned. In the year 1951, at the age of 19, Osho studied at Hitkarini College in the city of Jabalpur. This was short-lived, as an unknown conflict with an instructor forced Osho to transfer to D.N. Jain College. Wherever Osho went, he couldn't help but find himself in an argument. According to author Joshi, Osho was so disruptive and argumentative that he was restricted from attending classes except for tests. Osho then chose to use his newfound time to work as an assistant editor at a local newspaper at the Sarva Dharma Sammelan, or Meeting of All Faiths. He spent roughly 17 years publicly debating at these assemblies, all the while declining his parents' requests to marry in pursuit of sharing his mysticism. He also briefly associated himself with the Indian National Army, a group of Indian collaborators who fought against the British control under the command of the Japanese Empire. Osho decided he could not accept any external discipline, philosophy, or system, which led him to establish his own thought. This was in part due to the fact that on March 21st, 1953, when he was 21 years old, Osho allegedly had a magical experience while sitting under a tree in the Bonvartal Garden. Apparently, as the story goes, Osho used to climb a mahua tree at night and meditate. One night, as he was deep in thought, he fell from the tree, but when he awoke moments later, to his surprise, he was still sitting up in the tree. In his own words, "That day, for the first time, I saw my own body from outside, and since that day, the mere physical existence of my body finished forever. And from that day, death also ceased to exist. Because that day I experienced that body and spirit are two different things, quite separate from each other. That was the most important moment. My realization of the spirit that is within every human body." Osho described this sensation as an out-of-body experience, and later called it the second Satori, or enlightenment. This moment became a major part of his faith and the movement to come. Even the mahua tree was named the Satori tree, and remains of its wood are still maintained by Osho's followers. In 1955, at the age of 24, he completed his bachelor's in philosophy at D.N. Jain College. Then, Osho attended the University of Sagar and earned his master's in philosophy just 2 years later. Following his education, Osho secured a career as a teacher at Raipur Sanskrit College, but was asked to leave after his colleagues believed he was a danger to the students' morality, character, and religion. In 1958, he lectured at Jabalpur University and was even elevated to professor. Supposedly, the students and faculty of Jabalpur regarded him as a popular and extraordinarily intelligent man. Having surpassed the shortcomings of his small-town education, Osho earned a name for himself by giving lectures critical of socialism and religious institutions. Though, to be clear, he believed socialism comes from a successful capitalist economy and was extremely dangerous if not implemented properly. He called Orthodox Indian religions dead, filled with empty rituals that oppressed their followers with fears of damnation and promises of blessings. He embraced sexuality and materialism while denouncing Gandhi, along with conservative or traditional ideals.
Gandhi.
Although Gandhi had been dead for a few years, you couldn't ask to be more problematic by holding anti-Gandhi beliefs following his assassination. As a teacher, Osho was stopped one day by a correspondent and asked to give his version of the Ten Commandments. As followed, he replied, "Never obey anyone's command unless it is coming from within you also. There is no God other than life itself. Truth is within you. Do not search for it elsewhere. Love is prayer. To become a nothingness is the door to truth. Nothingness itself is the means, the goal, and attainment. Life is now and here. Live wakefully. Do not swim, float. Die each moment so that you can be new each moment. Do not search. That which is. Stop and see." The most important commandments in Osho's eyes were numbers 3, 7, 9, and 10. If this was meant to have an effect on his followers, it didn't seem to work. The only thing he satisfied was his own pseudo-intellectual appetite. These tales of a controversial guru were heard around India, but instead of a severe backlash, though that was to come, it miraculously gained him a loyal following of affluent businessmen and merchants. In fact, the wealthy elite would personally seek an audience with Osho for consultations about their spiritual development. What Osho provided to them was seemingly priceless. Nonetheless, monetary goals were easily reached through donations, snowballing Osho's practice. In 1969, Osho would gain his most infamous title after a particular lecture series, later published as Sex Matters: From Sex to Superconsciousness. in which he offended Hindu leaders by calling to accept sex more openly. Osho made the point that sex was not man's original sin, yet religions and societies often associate sex with sin or lack of morality. A question and response by Osho, lifted from the book, goes as follows. Question: you were saying that mere sex will go on producing only more and more children, but what do you produce when you join sex with meditation? You will produce yourself anew. You will find that you are not finished as you are. There are higher levels of your intelligence, of your consciousness. As you start producing those higher levels of your intelligence and consciousness, you will be surprised. Your interest in sex starts disappearing because now sex is producing something far greater than life. It is producing consciousness. Life is a lower thing. Consciousness is a higher thing. And once you are capable of producing consciousness, then there is no barrier that says you cannot make love, but it will look very dull. It won't give you any joy. It'll look like a sheer waste of energy. You would rather use your energy to create higher and higher pyramids of consciousness in yourself until you reach the ultimate point, which I call enlightenment. This enlightenment, as he describes it, is what superconsciousness is, but could not be achieved by just having sex. Although Indian press and media were quick to label Osho as the sex guru in a bid to discredit him. If you didn't buy his booklets, listen to his lectures, or partake in every therapy session or meditation, you simply could not reach this unattainable goal of superconsciousness. It was a scheme designed to have people coming back for more from the very start, including emptying their wallets. There was no stopping Osho and his apparent wealth of knowledge about love or sex. In 1969, he was invited to the Second World Hindu Conference, despite several Hindu leaders who voiced their concerns. In response to his critics, Osho is quoted as saying, "Any religion which considers life meaningless and full of misery and teaches the hatred of life is not a true religion. Religion is an art that shows how to enjoy life." He compared how women and members of the lower Shudra caste were treated like animals, while also accusing Brahmins of being driven by self-interest, which enraged the Shankaracharya of Puri, one of the most revered spiritual leaders in India. He was certainly disliked by some prestigious few, but was amassing millions of followers through his lectures and books, which were reaching Western bookstores.
Why is there a
in the
dead
height of
rogue
the
here?
Hindu Era. He couldn't have come out with a book about love,
A really high
sex,
level
and
one, too.
spirituality at a better time.
Like level
Sure,
40 or
guru
something?
culture was a phenomenon in India during the 60s and 70s, but Indian citizens knew better than to fall for it. Indians would participate in guru culture, listening to public sermons and teachings, but would have a couple of them in their rotation for wisdom, whereas Westerners usually picked one and worshipped them. After all, the West saw an explosion of hippies post-World War II and during Vietnam. Self-proclaimed progressive Westerners were consuming Eastern influences of culture, which led them to travel abroad to find the source. These self-help scams were more inclined to be loved by Western, white, liberal, and preferably rich women, who Osho consciously targeted to be his disciples. Besides the pure pleasure part of Osho's teachings, there were more clandestine techniques presented that could help you reach the supposed superconsciousness state. One infamous technique was dynamic meditation, which involved music, dancing, and fast, heavy breathing. As the name implies, anything goes as long it was Osho approved. On September 26, 1970, after tons of meditations, private meetings, lectures, and a published book, Osho decided to coin his movement and bring about disciples, or what he liked to call his neo-sannyasins. Each member is required to take their sannyas, essentially declaring that there are no gods before Osho, and that to achieve enlightenment, they must do exactly what he says. They become his devout followers, who renounce the world around them, as well as any claims to social or familial standings. Each member of this small clique, now a part of Osho's dream, had to undergo a rather jarring lifestyle and appearance change. Neo-sannyasins had to assume a new name, wear a traditional saffron dress with a beaded necklace, and lastly, a locket with Osho's picture. For women, your new name would have the prefix Ma, meaning mother. For men, your new name gets the prefix Swami, meaning father. Whether you picked your own name or Osho felt strongly enough to name you himself, it didn't really matter. Donning this new name signified that you were all in on Osho. In other words, you were now his sworn sannyasin. Osho was now your master. Osho gained his first secretary from this bunch, a woman named Laxmi Takarsi Karua, who took the name Ma Yoga Laxmi. Laxmi was the daughter of one of Osho's earliest adherents, a wealthy supporter of the Indian National Congress, who had close ties to influential people. If you couldn't guess, Osho knew exactly who to elevate, as Laxmi raised enough money so that Osho could stop traveling as often and settle down. By 1970, Osho moved to the Woodlands Apartments in Mumbai, where he continued to lecture and receive visitors. However, it's believed the first Western visitors began to arrive in droves. He told his new followers he was not to be worshipped, for he was, quote, a sun encouraging the flower to open. Osho was content to no longer speak at public meetings and seldom traveled, as hundreds came to see him personally. A year later, in 1971, he underwent one of his famous name changes, from Acharya to Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. I have chosen it for a specific purpose, and it has been serving well, because people who used to come to gather knowledge, they stopped. The day I called myself Bhagwan, they stopped. It was too much for them. It was too much for their egos. Someone calling himself Bhagwan, it hurts the ego. Now I've changed my function absolutely. I started working on a different level, in a different dimension. Now I give you being, not knowledge. I was an Acharya, and they were students. They were learning. Now I am no more a teacher, and you are not here as students. I am here to impart being. I am here to make you awaken. I am not here to give knowledge. I am going to give you knowing, and that is a totally different dimension. Osho's teachings in Mumbai were cut short, as the conditions in the area caused him to contract numerous illnesses, including diabetes and asthma, which led the group migrating to a new property in Koregan Park, Pune, with the help of Ma Yoga Mukta, originally named Catherine Venizelos, a wealthy shipping heiress from Greece. This property would turn into Osho's infamous ashram, defined as a spiritual monastery or retreat for Indian religions. It was here where Osho's lectures were recorded and printed for worldwide distribution, enabling him to reach far larger audiences, especially more of those wealthy Western visitors. More people equals more money, so the ashram transformed into something much more than just a place of discourse or meditation. According to a 1986 article by the New Yorker, the ashram featured an arts and crafts center producing clothes, ceramics, jewelry, and apparently hosted performances of music and theater. And they slept on uncomfortable mattresses, which is why today's video is sponsored by Helix. Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding, customized to fit your needs, conveniently shipped in a box right to your doorstep. You don't even have to leave your house. Everybody's different, and Helix knows that. That's why they designed a sleep quiz that helps match your unique body type to your sleeping preferences. This way, they can find the best mattress for you. If you sleep with a partner or even a pet, you can take the quiz together so that you can find the best compromise for everyone. Personally, I sleep on my side and stomach, and I prefer a medium mattress feel, which is why I was matched with the Midnight Lux. I've been sleeping on Helix mattresses for over 2 years now, and ever since I moved, I had to upgrade from a queen to a king. That's how much I love my Helix. The days of going to a mattress store are over. You no longer have to sit through an annoying sales pitch only to be sold an uncomfortable, overpriced mattress. Your new Helix comes rolled in a box directly to you. I actually had fun setting up my new bed. It took me just under 5 minutes to carry it up the stairs and watch my new mattress spring to life. You don't even have to take it from me. If Sebastian is sleeping on it, you know it's the best. If it makes you nervous to buy something that you haven't tried yet in person, Helix offers a 100-night sleep trial. This gives you a little bit over 3 months to completely fall in love with your new mattress. Best of all, every Helix mattress comes with a 10-year warranty. They offer flexible payment plans and even have financing options available, so a great night's sleep is never that far away. I love my Helix, and I think you would too. If you're in the need for a new bed, check out Helix. Visit helixsleep.com/Philion to get 20% off your Helix mattress, plus 2 free pillows. And thank you to Helix for sponsoring this video. However, the major source of income for the ashram wasn't some macaroni art project. It was therapy groups and Osho's own meditations sold to anyone looking to unlock their inner potential. There are a plethora of books and articles that go into detail about the day-to-day life, as well as the intense and exciting atmosphere the ashram exuded. Described as a madhouse carnival, the day began at 6 in the morning with a dynamic meditation session. At 8, Osho would give about an hour-long lecture in the ashram's Buddha Hall. He commented on religious text and answered questions from his audience. Throughout the day, meditations would occur, but that depended upon Osho's own Buddha field, or his spiritual energy. In the evening, Osho would once again speak with disciples or visitors, but also initiate disciples into the order. These occasions were known as darshans. In Indian philosophy and religion, a darshan is the opportunity of meeting a revered person or sacred deity. It goes without saying that Osho's followers thought of him as inhuman, as someone or something who has transcended. This is where it gets sketchy. There was, and still is, a severe disconnect between the current public image of Osho, exacerbated on social media, and who he truly was as a man. By far, the most disturbing chapter out of Russell King's Rajneeshpuram, Inside the Cult of Bhagwan and its failed American utopia, is titled The Mirage. I highly recommend reading this book if you want to understand the full scope of the abuse that Osho committed and ignored. The chapter details the specific experiences of early Osho followers in the Mumbai apartment era in the early 1970s. During some darshan ceremonies, Osho would tell women disciples to undress. Then he would proceed to employ a series of psychological and physical assault. The power dynamic he called for required the disciples to surrender to him completely. That's what it meant to be a sannyasin. This includes Ma Prem Diksha, real name Maria Grazia, a young Italian woman who sought his guidance, as well as an unnamed American tourist who was forced to undergo an abortion paid for by Lakshmi as a result of Osho impregnating her following one of his meditations. Another American writer by the name Satya Bharti was assaulted by Osho, and the same pattern of assault was employed. Osho would start by telling them that Westerners have repressed sexual energy, and he needed to see it flow. He would then touch various chakras and come up with random reasoning as to why he was touching them inappropriately. This didn't stop with touching, and the full accounts are too graphic to state. By 1973, these darshans would end, as wealthy disciples became unsettled when they found out Osho was sleeping or assaulting his women devotees. Diksha, who was once a loyal sannyasin, renounced him and left the commune when she realized the true monster that was Osho. According to the New Yorker article, visitors had 2 choices. They could choose what therapies they wanted to participate in, or Osho would decide for them. The problem was, some individuals chose or were placed into experimental therapy groups called encounter groups. Encounter therapy is a non-traditional group of psychotherapy exercises developed in the United States in the 1940s. This type of therapy had a huge revival in the 60s and 70s, but in Osho's case, the people leading his sessions had no actual training or knowledge of how to properly conduct them. They allowed physical aggression and sexual encounters between participants. Many people were harmed in emotional outbursts, sustaining bruises, cuts, and scrapes, all while the Osho empire was collecting a ton of money insanely fast. The most compelling evidence of this shocking therapy group is Richard Price's report. At the time, Richard was co-founder of the Esalen Institute and a prominent therapist of the Human Potential Movement, which had provided several therapists for Osho's ashram. He concluded the participants were actually violent instead of, quote, playing at being violent, which is apparently the norm in United States encounter groups. After spending 8 hours imprisoned in a room with people wielding wooden weapons, it said Price left the ashram with a broken arm and dozens of minor injuries. It was clear encounter therapy in the wrong hands could lead to more problems rather than solutions. By January of 1979, the ashram decided to end all violence taking place within therapy groups as explained in their statement. Violence had fulfilled its function within the overall context of the ashram as an evolving spiritual commune. At least they admitted to going overboard. It's just too bad that this statement meant all of nothing. As these therapies didn't stop, they were just better concealed. According to author Russell King of Rajneeshpuram, Inside the Cult of Bhagwan and its failed American utopia, Osho would make people go on extremely challenging quests, such as meditate in the Himalayas, build a commune in a particular city, and report back. These were random, and he would ascribe a certain lesson to each of them, or, honestly, he just made it up as he went, essentially wasting everyone's time while they thought they were being enlightened. This process was known as a device. Osho's devices were just manipulation tactics to get his followers deeply entrenched into the cult, which all led back to Osho's wallet. If you happen to survive through months or even years of meditation and therapy, then you could apply to work at the ashram, because what choice do you have other than to take a career at the place that's been indoctrinating you? Better yet, you are not paid. Ever. In some stories, Westerners wanting to stay at the ashram finance their extended stays in India through prostitution and drug running. That's how badly some people wanted to stay in Osho's divine presence. With a chance of basking in the presence of Osho, it became apparent the place was too small to contain the rapid growth of his movement. Busloads of men were joining Osho's following, but not for enlightenment or spirituality, rather a hedonistic vacation. What the men didn't receive in a weekly paycheck, they received as food and women, quite literally. The women weren't any different. They desired the same and were even told by Osho to sleep with particular men at the ashram, and yes, even himself. Osho was adamant about finding a larger place, and he made it clear amongst his closest followers. In turn, his sannyasins scoured India for properties, but Osho's movement and fast growth came with a price.
50 silver
The
again.
Janata Party government, religious leaders, and all those who disliked Osho's teachings put obstacles in his way to deter new followers and hopefully end the matter of Osho once and for all. For example, the tax-exempt status of the ashram was cancelled, resulting in a claim estimated at $5 million. Osho, by and large, was a wanted man, branded with claims of brainwashing those at his ashram. In May of 1980, while giving a usual lecture similar to any other, a young Hindu fanatic named Vilas Tup made an attempt on Osho's life. Tup asserted that he carried out the attack because he thought Osho was a CIA operative. This event turned Osho into a spiritual martyr. People were more willing to bask in his presence and become a member of his order, and nothing would stop the wave of followers that would come. By 1981, roughly a year after the assassination attempt, the ashram was hosting roughly 30,000 visitors per year. By this time, audience members were mostly European and American visitors. Allegedly, due to the wide variety of personalities in his audience, Osho's lectures turned from intellectual discourse to dirty jokes and ethnic remarks. Nevertheless, in a strange twist of events, on April 10th, 1981, Osho entered a 3.5-year period of self-imposed public silence.
He took a break.
We will never know his true reasoning, but it can be inferred it was for legal
Meditation.
reasons involving Indian authorities. For almost 4 years, Osho did not speak publicly at all, remaining in a lazy, vegetative state where he didn't leave his favorite chair and replaced his lectures with music or readings. Just as Osho's speeches came to an abrupt stop, one of the most important associates joined the ranks of the ashram in order to become Osho's new secretary. Sheila Silverman, going by her sannyasa name
Anand Sheila.
Sheila Ambala Patel was born on December 28, 1949, in Baroda, India. She was the youngest of 6 children, and at 18 moved to the United States and attended Montclair State College in New Jersey. During her college years, she met and married Mark Silverman, changing her name to Sheila Silverman. And in 1972, the two of them moved to India, becoming disciples of Osho. Mark had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and told by doctors he would die within the year. Sheila herself claimed he lived for 13 years following his diagnosis, and that he enjoyed his life as a newly appointed sannyasin under the guidance of Osho. As his conditions slowly worsened, Mark was ultimately bedridden. Mark passed away while in India, and his funeral at Osho's ashram was filmed, showing hundreds of mourners accompanying him on his last procession through the gardens. Except, there's one small issue. Mark Silverman didn't die from cancer. Sheila, with the help of her confidant and private nurse named Pooja, injected Mark with a lethal dose of some sort of euthanizing agent. She had been given Osho's blessing to essentially mercy kill her husband as a way to end his suffering. After a lavish party in Mark's room at the ashram, he was put to sleep and found dead the following morning. This information was later provided to the FBI from Krishna Deva, a high-ranking Rajneeshpuram official who alleged that Sheila told him this in private. Sheila, Pooja, nor Osho were found guilty or faced criminal charges for euthanizing Mark Silverman. As a disciple, Sheila changed her name again to Anand Sheila and became one of Osho's secretaries, working alongside Lakshmi, although Sheila was more ambitious and inclined to usurp Lakshmi's position. Sheila was essentially the spokesperson for the movement as Osho began his long public silence. After the death of her first husband, Mark Silverman, 6 months later, Sheila remarried another American, a New York banker named John Shelford, who was also a disciple of Osho, otherwise known as Swami Prem Jayananda. By 1981, tensions increased between Osho, his followers, and Indian authorities. Put simply, Osho and his sannyasins were unwanted and ostracized, but they devised a clever plan to move the ashram to a new commune located in the United States. On June 1st, 1981, Osho and company traveled to the United States on a tourist visa, purportedly for medical reasons, and spent months in a makeshift commune at Kipps Castle in Montclair, New Jersey. These medical reasons were not referencing Osho's asthma or diabetes, but his severe back pain, which Sheila had exaggerated in order to acquire a 6-month visa for her master. As indicated by Sheila's public statement, Osho would be in grave danger if he stayed in India, but could receive the necessary medical care in America if he required surgery. Osho never sought outside medical attention while he was in the United States, despite the alleged seriousness of his condition, which led the INS, or Immigration and Naturalization Service, that he had a premeditated intention to remain in the States. Lo and behold, this was part of Sheila's grand plan, to infiltrate the United States on Osho's behalf in order to use the U.S. Constitution as a shield, garnering absolute freedom to begin their new mega commune. Westerners were already the bulk of
Mega
his following and
commune.
supplied him with buckets full of money, so moving to the United States was only a matter of time, a decision that made perfect sense once you realized how much capitalism pays. To demonstrate just how devious Sheila was, her medical foray into the U.S. ultimately failed, and she was forced to resort to drastic measures: aggravated arson fraud. In desperately trying to appease Master Osho, Sheila burned warehouses at the ashram in Pune to the ground in a bid to fraudulently collect insurance money from the properties. And it worked. She used said money to buy off a lobbyist in the United States who finally granted Osho his 6-month visa. It wasn't wasn't just Sheila who had the idea to move the ashram. For now, the temporary ashram in Montclair, New Jersey, would act as a staging ground for Osho's new regime. From 1981 to 1984, Osho and his acolytes would cement themselves in American history. They just didn't know it yet. The miracle Osho was waiting for came in the form of divine intervention on June 13th, 1981. Sheila's second husband, John Shelfer, purchased a massive parcel of land in Oregon for almost $6 million, nearly 20 million US dollars today. This was made possible with a $1.5 million down payment. The property, known at the time as the Big Muddy Ranch, was an alarming 64,000 acres and positioned across two counties, Wasco and Jefferson. To put that into perspective, the ranch was about the size of 6 Manhattans. The ranch was renamed to Rancho Rajneesh, and Osho moved there on August 29th, 1981. Russell King describes Osho as perceiving himself as a messianic figure for the West and its people. According to King, Osho was secretly recorded saying, quote, "I will succeed where Hitler failed. I am the Messiah promised to America." The book claims Osho professed his love and admiration for Hitler on 2 separate occasions that we know of. The first time, it was at a private meeting with Diksha and Sheila at Kip's Castle in New Jersey. He told them to study Joseph Goebbels, as he was a master manipulator and that Hitler was a genius just like himself. The second occurrence, known as the Hitler tape, is a 10-minute recording of Osho's voice taken from his room that was bugged with spy equipment placed by Sheila and her spy master. In this recording, Osho claimed that it was acceptable to kill his enemies if they interfered with his vision, a parallel to Hitler's final solution. Within weeks of their arrival, they were met with hostility emanating from local communities, as well as lawsuits regarding land use by state and federal opposition. The land was arid, dry, and pretty much unfarmable, according to the natives of Antelope, the closest town near the ranch. Locals hated their new neighbors with such resentment that they called them red rats or red vermin, encouraging their expulsion from the state or in some cases, their death. Some instances of the Orange Horde's counterattacks against their opponents include Antelope, which at one point was even renamed Rajneesh after his sannyasins living in the town won the deciding referendum. Sheila's plan was to buckle down and entrench themselves as much as possible, so that if they were ever told to move, it would be a daunting task. The year they arrived, it was essential to turn the newly purchased barren wasteland into the foundation of Osho's ultimate ashram. After a relatively short time in the United States, on October 4th, 1981, a petition began to turn Osho's commune into his personal city, Rajneeshpuram. If they wanted their city, they were going to need to follow the law. Nonetheless, there were most definitely shady loopholes and a few stern handshakes involved, which helped the Orange Mob bypass substantial obstacles. Krishna Deva, the eventual mayor of Osho's metropolis, studied specific zoning laws for the land in Oregon to ensure their commune wouldn't be hassled by authorities for now. For instance, most of the land had to be dedicated for agricultural use only, despite the lack of arable land. As for the petition to lawfully declare their commune a city, the Orange Horde infiltrated Antelope's voting referendum and ended up solidifying the ranch as a separate city. In order to pull this off, there needed to be a voting population of 150 members, and 20%, or just 30 members, needed to vote in favor of the decision. It was a landslide victory, considering sannyasins made up nearly 100% of the voter base. An Oregonian judge by the name Jim Comini had voted no in reference to the city's proposal, was hounded by the sannyasins, to the point he was almost killed by Osho fanatics years later. Krishna Deva, Rajneeshpuram's first and only mayor, drafted the development plans, and by 1982, it was an all-out frenzy of building projects, constructions, and furnishings, which gave Osho's compound some vibrant life. The first building, or office space, was known as the Zarathustra, in which over 300 sham marriages were held to ensure U.S. citizenship. There was also the Magdalena Cafeteria, or Maggie's, and a staggering 80,000 square foot greenhouse known as Rajneesh Mandir, meaning temple 1982, Osho's movement spawned the first annual World Celebration, inviting followers from all over the world to partake in a 5-day bender at the Oregon ashram. The land was being turned into something useful, while the newly finished buildings came together to resemble an ordinary town or city. Work was considered worship, and as long as sannyasins, newcomers, and veterans alike worked hard at building their new home, they were kindly rewarded by being taken care of. They were treated to 3 strictly vegetarian meals a day, and basically every living necessity was given to them: food, shelter, toothpaste, soap, deodorant, even condoms. In just a few years, this desolate rural ranch that sat untapped turned into a fully functioning city, housing approximately 7,000 people, though thought to be much more. At its height, the city had a police station, fire department, townhouses, malls, and restaurants, as well as a post office, public transportation, sewage reclamation plant, reservoir, and their very own zip code, 97741. The most impressive feature was the 4,000-foot airstrip, home to Osho's personal airline, Air Rajneesh. A part of the Air Rajneesh fleet included a military-grade helicopter, 3 DC-3s, 1 Convair 240, and first ever addition to Osho's collection, a BM-2 Islander. It's believed these aircraft were used as Osho's personal transportation and to bring cargo or new recruits to the city. An incident in 1983 gave Osho the ability to employ heavily armed guards in oddly colorful uniforms, which came to resemble a small paramilitary force. The incident in question was the bombing of Hotel Rajneesh in Portland, Oregon, by American citizen Stephen Pastor, believed to be a member of the Islamic terrorist organization Jamaat-ul-Faqra. The terrorist group was specifically looking for weak targets associated with Indian religions, such as Hinduism, although for Pastor, he would have to make do with the Orange Swarm in Oregon. On July 29th, 1983, Pastor planted and detonated 3 separate pipe bombs at Osho's hotel, causing approximately $200,000 in damages, but ironically did not harm anyone but himself. A severely injured Pastor fled Oregon, but was arrested in Colorado not long after and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He served just 4 years, and when he was released, he moved to Lahore, Pakistan, where it's alleged he became an instructor for advanced training courses in guerrilla warfare. Osho, who was now armed to the teeth, had his own little army, as well as an entire police force to use against his enemies. He began to envision or entertain the idea that nations would eventually replace their large cities with smaller communities, following a communal way of life similar to Rajneeshpuram. He believed in intentional communities and that they would take over as the norm, which are defined as voluntary societies with a high degree of teamwork and social cohesion. In hindsight, it didn't look like Osho really wanted a small communal living space. He was on track to create a worldwide, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. According to author Hugh Urban in From Sex Guru to Guru of the Rich, at the height of the Rajneeshpuram era, Osho had built a corporate machine made up of numerous front companies and subsidiaries with the aid of an advanced legal and commercial infrastructure. The ranch church, also known as the Rajneesh International Foundation, the Rajneesh Investment Corporation, which was in charge of managing the RIF, and the Rajneesh Neo-Sannyasi International Commune were the 3 main distinguishable entities that made up his organization at the time. The umbrella organization that oversaw all investment activities was Rajneesh Services International Limited, a company incorporated in the UK but based in Zurich. Smaller businesses that dealt only with the purchase and renting of Rolls-Royces included Rajneesh Travel Corp, Rajneesh Community Holdings, and the Rajneesh Modern Car Collection Trust. All of this being said, the commune was still subject to sustained and coordinated attacks from individuals and coalitions throughout its presence in Oregon. Alongside the citizenry and authorities, there were 2 main activist organizations who tried to fight against the ever-encompassing blob that was the Orange Horde. The Thousand Friends of Oregon, who were basically the arch nemesis of Rajneeshpuram, spending 6 years tying the commune up in legal disputes while revoking improvements or removing buildings, as well as local residents who established the citizens for constitutional cities in order to monitor the commune and force its demolition. The archived article from 1981 affirms their decision, quote, to contain, control, and remove the threat of invasion by an alien cult. Additionally, definitive measures were passed by the Oregon legislature to restrict Rajneeshpuram. Vic-Atia, the governor of Oregon, openly called for the group to leave the state, and Senator Mark Hatfield spoke with the INS, worried the commune posed a threat to the way of life for a small agricultural town.
Yes, I got a
Overall public safety. All while this was taking place, Osho was still undergoing a time of complete silence. His sannyasins seemed to be entertained enough by the speeches captured on tape and shown to collective audiences. Osho apparently spent most of his time alone and only spoke to a small circle of important pupils, such as his secretary, Ma Anand Sheila, and caretaker girlfriend, Ma Yoga Vivek, also known as Christine Wolfe. Between 1981
He had a white girl.
1984,
He had a white girl
she
girlfriend.
gained significant power and authority at Rajneeshpuram, becoming the sole person Osho would converse with, even though their relationship would slowly taper off. Life on the commune was rather simple. While the sannyasins worked, Osho enjoyed his pleasure palace, known as Lao Tzu. It was no secret Osho was driven by material greed and worldly pleasures. In fact, he encouraged his sannyasins...
Gonna go pee, I'll be right back.
Since he refused to talk, he chose to engage his followers through his famous drive-by Rolls-Royce ceremonies. Osho would be driven through the town of Rajneeshpuram in one of his many Rolls-Royces. If that wasn't pretentious enough, Osho was so obsessed with Rolls-Royce cars to the point he accumulated an insane collection with a total of 93. Osho would throw temper tantrums and demand Sheila to order more Rolls-Royces, and when she would refuse, he would threaten to end his life. This gluttonous display of wealth can only be understood by knowing what Osho thought about religion, materialism, and success as a whole. Osho believed that religion wasn't for the poor man because they were too bogged down by worldly problems. In fact, it was for the rich man. A poor man was useless to Osho. He had nothing to offer and nothing to learn, but the rich man had the time and money for all of the bullshit Osho was peddling. Sometimes these rich followers would bring their children to experience Osho's wisdom as well, or just abandon them altogether, leaving them behind while they traveled to meet with their master. But there was a major problem when it came to his new utopia, Osho's plan for the children of the commune. It would have been too much for Osho to ask his sannyasins to abandon their children in pursuit of their spirituality, because he needed their money. He held strong anti-children beliefs despite preaching sex to superconsciousness. As a result, every so often the commune's meditations would end up producing children. These children were restricted to the ranch, but at the same time were mostly left unsupervised. Every child was homeschooled by fellow sannyasins, although by and large Osho despised children and only tolerated them on the commune so that they would be his followers in the future. Without getting too graphic, age gap relationships were often the standard among minors and adults. Children were encouraged to explore adulthood while still extremely young, which included observing adults who were participating in playtime. It was an environment that no child should have ever been a part of. Osho thought of himself as better than his disciples and smarter than any government. However, Osho did share one thing in common with his followers: a massive problem surrounding their U.S. citizenship status. The main illegal loophole that was being encouraged by Osho and exploited by his followers was bunk marriages. Administrators at the ranch would pair up worthy sannyasins and come up with elaborate backstories about their lives in an effort to bypass immigration laws. This tactic certainly bought the Rajneeshis time, but it didn't necessarily fix Osho's problem. Osho himself needed to be declared a religious leader to take full advantage of the Constitution's freedoms. The cult devised a plan to suspend their anti-religion stance in an effort to solidify Osho as head of their new religion, dubbed Rajneeshism, to resolve his personal immigration matter. They created a short pamphlet that listed all of fascism was going to be responsible for creating a Noah's Ark of consciousness to save as many as possible from the fate that was soon to come. Another prediction paraded around the commune was that Osho foretold an AIDS pandemic that would come and kill 2/3 of the human population. Sheila believed in Osho's prophecy to the point in which requirements were put in place, forcing sannyasins to wear rubber gloves, condoms, and abstain from kissing. Whether she was pretending to play along, or she truly believed in Rajneesh's new holy text, Sheila was fervently obsessed with pleasing Osho and would go to any length to prove that she was worthy to serve him. At the time, she had received coaching from Osho on how to make the most of media attention. And during his period of silence, Osho allegedly said Sheila spoke on his behalf. She would later tell outlets Osho was addicted to Valium and nitrous oxide, or laughing gas.
Valium and nitrous, are you serious?
Books, Golden Childhood, Notes of a Madman, and Books I Have Loved. Supposedly, Sheila believed she was telling the truth, and that her stories could discredit Osho, leaving sole authority over Rajneeshpuram and its wealth to her. But Osho wasn't going to let anyone steal his power. In turn, two groups formed, one under Sheila and one under Osho, kicking off a bitter civil war within America's newly ordained city. Osho was the leader of the Rajneeshis on paper, but when it came down to loyalty, Sheila was pulling the strings. This war began with Sheila hiring her own staff, members of Rajneeshpuram that would strictly follow her orders without question. Her team consisted of Krishna Deva, the mayor of Rajneeshpuram, Swami Julian, aka the Speaker, who acted as her personal spy master by monitoring telephone calls, bugging rooms, and keeping track of any dissenting voices. Ma Anand Puja, known as the nurse, Sheila's main accomplice and lieutenant, as well as Ma Ava, a young girl acting as one of Sheila's henchmen. Sheila and her team operated mainly out of Jesus Grove, whereas Osho and his inner circle, nicknamed the Hollywood Crew because of their immense wealth and power outside of the commune, spent most of their time around Lao. Sheila was becoming increasingly worried that Osho wanted to voluntarily die around the 3rd annual World Festival with the help of his personal doctor named Devaraj. In an effort to separate Devaraj from Osho, Sheila had his oatmeal spiked with an absurd amount of Dukalax.
Oh no.
In the Rajneeshpuram Medical Center, exactly where she wanted him. Puja then gave Devaraj an IV to rehydrate him, as he was violently sick. Except, instead of saline, she grabbed the nearest flower pot and injected him with the dirty plain water. After a near-death experience of going septic, Devaraj miraculously recovered over the next coming weeks, but Sheila's plan worked. This would be her first experiment with using biological warfare, her preferred method of assault. In fact, Sheila developed a top-secret facility at Rajneeshpuram devoted to her biological warfare experiments. A shady, rundown shed with a padlock nicknamed Chinese Laundry. This building was initially a schoolhouse for the commune's children, but
the Chinese Laundry,
in order to turn it into her own experimental laboratory. It was the perfect place for Puja to tirelessly work on perfecting a salmonella concoction to be used on any number of Sheila's enemies, including Osho, if it came down to it. Allegedly, he was completely unaware of
I had
Sheila's
no
actions
idea it went
and
this
didn't
deep
care to
at
know.
all.
So it was no surprise she, with the help of Spook, was able to bug everything in Osho's compound, including his chair, which allowed them to monitor his most intimate conversations. At the same time, Osho's city had come into increased conflict with the Wasco County Board of Commissioners. Sheila desperately tried
This
to have
crazy
Rajneesh
story.
candidates take the 2 open seats on the board to win an upcoming November election. Yet, there were simply not enough voters for her to swing the outcome, which resulted in her bussing in hundreds of homeless people. This operation was called the Share a Home Program. A massive influx of homeless men and women from various U.S. cities were bussed to Oregon in an attempt to affect the outcome of this specific election, essentially trying to take control of Wasco County before releasing them into nearby towns and leaving others to the state of Oregon. In other words, it was now the responsibility of the state at the taxpayer's expense, and Rajneeshpuram was not equipped to deal with the slew of medical and mental health issues that came with the disenfranchised people. But the Share a Home program failed miserably for the Rajneeshis. They didn't get their 2 seats, and they just added another crime to their ever-growing list of felonies: conspiracy to commit voter fraud. This was just the beginning. The most well-known and dangerous crime committed was Sheila's magnum opus, a potentially lethal bioterror attack orchestrated by her and members of Jesus Grove. Sheila decided to unleash the salmonella culture she was molding as a weapon to infect dozens of salad bars across 10 different restaurants in Dalles, Oregon, leaving roughly 750 citizens sickened, rendering voters deathly incapable. Luckily, there were no fatalities, but 45 people were hospitalized. This plan also failed, as the Sannyasin candidate was removed from the election ballot following the attack. Local Oregonians were somewhat used to the shady and destructive measures that the Orange mob were willing to take, immediately suspecting them. But as authorities tried to track down the specific culprits, a secret meeting was called between Sheila and Osho in the early months of 1984, at a time when tension among their inner circles surged. Osho had previously supported her when disagreements over her behavior surfaced within the communal leadership, but this time he didn't want to make the same mistake, choosing to reprimand her and declare that, quote, his house, not hers, was the center of the commune. On October 30th, 1984, Osho finally ended his period of public silence, stating it was time to speak his own truths. In Osho's own words, Sheila and her henchmen turned the commune into a fascist regime. As a result, Sheila did everything in her power to divert attention away from herself and stop any discourse by Osho or his sannyasins that defined her as a criminal. Osho even invited authorities to investigate her based on certain attacks and crimes that took place mostly during 1984. In 1985, Charles Turner, the Oregon District Attorney, tried looking into the salmonella attacks personally and caught the eye of some orange goons. Sheila caught wind of this and decided that her enemies must be crushed if it was going to mean freedom for herself and her Rajneeshis. Turner, as well as 2 others who tried uncovering their plot, including Les Zaitz, the investigative journalist, and Oregon Attorney General David Frohnmeyer, were ordered to be assassinated. Sheila's henchmen bought fake IDs, weapons, and suppressors across state lines, with the intent of silently dispatching any potential threats. The first member on their hit list was Charles Turner. They began following Charles around Portland, Oregon, but before they decided on how to execute their mission, the plot was uncovered by federal agents who claimed to have been given information from an informant within the Witness Protection Program. In an effort to wash himself from any wrongdoing, Osho decided to turn on his own followers, pinning all of the blame on Sheila. To honor his loyalists and destroy any remnant of Sheila's influence, Osho and his disciples burned thousands of copies of the book Rajneeshism, insisting that Sheila had published them under his name. Sheila's very own robes were added to the massive bonfire to finally rid her connection with Osho's glorious commune. Osho claimed that the purported crimes which had been carried out without his knowledge or approval included the attempted murder of his personal doctor, girlfriend, Oregonian government officials, as well as the eavesdropping and surveillance of the commune and Osho's personal residence. These allegations were initially greeted with skepticism by outside observers, but a subsequent inquiry by American authorities supported them, leading to Sheila and some of her lieutenants' criminal convictions. They found wiretapping networks and a full-blown Walter White laboratory in her home, which was used to grow the bacteria used in the bioterror attack. Sheila fled to Europe as the allegations spread, while Osho and his
The truth is always stranger than fiction.
She was arrested in West Germany in October of 1985 and extradited to the United States on charges of immigration fraud and attempted murder. She was prosecuted for crimes relating to the poisoning of 2 county officials, the arson and destruction of a Wasco County office, as well as the infamous restaurant bio attack. Sheila's salmonella attack is considered the first confirmed instance of chemical terrorism to take place within the U.S. and the largest bioterror attack to have occurred on U.S. soil. So you would think her sentence would land her in prison for the rest of the foreseeable future. She was sentenced to 3 20-year terms in federal prison.
Wow.
This was reduced to a shocking 4.5 years. As a cherry on top, she was released after just 3 years in prison on good behavior. After her incarceration, Sheila fled back to Europe and moved to Switzerland, where it's believed she still lives today. Sheila runs 2 nursing homes for the elderly suffering from diseases such as dementia, which was explored in depth through the documentary Searching for Sheila. Not only is Sheila unequivocally guilty on multiple accounts of terrorism and Machiavellian abuse, she also took the blame for Osho's crimes.
I didn't know Searching for Sheila existed. I'm gonna watch it tonight. Searching for Sheila, I didn't know.
Law enforcement officials Charles Turner and David Fraunmeyer, they collected enough credible.
I like Sheila, despite how crazy she was. I kind of like Sheila. She had a fucking vibe to her. Don't take shit from anybody. And these days, you get canceled for that. But back in the day, we used to call that like having heart, bravery, strong, you know, strong moral fiber, strong fiber, that kind of thing. She was crazy, but she was strong. One of the stronger women I've ever heard of, really.
Recordings that clearly displayed Osho was guilty of more crimes than the ones he would be prosecuted for. Fraunmeyer went as far as to call both Sheila and Osho genuinely evil, which begs the question, was Osho the true mastermind this entire time? Sadly, we'll never know, considering Fraunmeyer and Turner couldn't collect enough evidence to involve him in any of the criminal activities that took place in Rajneeshpuram, which makes sense considering Osho barely left his chair and refused to speak, and when he did, it was to be in one of his 93 Rolls Royces. Even so, Osho had been evading authorities since coming to the United States, and on October 23rd, 1985, they finally caught up with him. He was indicted by a federal grand jury, as well as several other close followers with conspiracy to evade immigration laws. According to Sheila's tape recordings, authorities claimed there was a plan to use women and children as human shields for Osho if police came to arrest him. Luckily, it didn't come to that, and while most likely trying to flee the country, Osho was apprehended aboard one of his jets in North Carolina at Charlotte Douglas International Airport by federal agents. Upon searching the aircraft, $60,000 in cash, as well as 35 watches and bracelets worth about $1 million were found. Osho entered a not guilty plea to each of the 34 counts against him and spent just 12 days in 6 different jails as he was transferred all around the country. He was eventually released after paying $500,000 in bail and returned to his beloved city, where he remained in contact with lawyers, trying to hatch a plan to save his skin. On the counsel of his attorneys, he later entered an Alford plea to 2 counts. One of concealing his intention to reside permanently in the United States at the time of his initial visa, and the other of conspiring to induce sannyasins to enter into false marriages in order to obtain U.S. residency. He received a 10-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, a $400,000 fine, and agreed to leave the United States, only able to ever return on orders from the U.S. Attorney General. Upon having been forced out of the United States, his followers in Oregon dispersed, leaving Rajneeshpuram completely abandoned. According to Carl Abbott in Utopia and Bureaucracy, The Fall of Rajneeshpuram, Oregon courts found in favor of the city, and by 1987, the Oregon Supreme Court ended litigation proceedings. Rajneeshpuram was bankrupt and uninhabited, but kept legal on paper within Oregon law. The land was eventually sold at an auction for $4.5 million in 1988 to Connecticut General Life Insurance. In 1991, the firm Washington Construction
Let's get 20, it's good.
For $3.6 million and attempted to get the state to turn it into a park. Having failed, failed to turn the ranch for a profit. 5 years later, Washington donated the land to Young Life, a Christian youth organization, and to this day, the Big Muddy Ranch acts as a campsite serving high schoolers and middle schoolers. For Osho, he returned to India and was welcomed by hundreds of disciples who had been enthusiastically waiting for their master's arrival. Back in his homeland, he wasted no time in denouncing the United States, but was eager to buy another piece of property or building to use as his commune site. He was looking at an atoll in the South Pacific that Marlon Brando was looking to sell. Osho never did buy the property because upon visiting the island, he and his followers realized it was prone to heavy storms and flooding. The idea of finding a new piece of land haunted Osho as he spent most of his time trying to find a new place that he could call home. He moved to Nepal and then Crete, where he was arrested by the Greek National Intelligence Service after rebuking political and religious leaders by calling them idiots. He then traveled to Stockholm, London, Canada, and Ireland, but was either refused entry or couldn't make up his mind on a new location. He eventually settled down in Uruguay, where he gave lectures at the Punta del Este, but was, quote, invited to leave for no official reason. After another failed trip, Osho relocated to Jamaica using a 2-week visa, which ended in the Kingston police giving the group 12 hours to leave. Osho reluctantly returned to India a third time on July 30th, 1986. Just a year later, he restored the ashram in Pune and held evening discourses similar to days past. Due to his deteriorating health, which Osho blamed was the fault of U.S. authorities that had poisoned him, he began to stop leading meditations and led a more quiet life. However, it seems in later years that Osho couldn't decide who was better, Hitler or Stalin, because he adamantly stressed that communism was revolutionary. In lectures titled Communism and Zen Fire, Zen Wind, Osho criticized capitalism, mainly the United States, while claiming communism could evolve into spiritualism, which would then evolve into anarchism. In his own words, quote, "I've always been very scientific in my approach, either outside or inside. Communism can be the base, then spirituality has to be its growth to provide what it's missing." As his health declined, Osho changed his name from Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh to Osho Rajneesh, and then finally Osho by September of 1989, additionally requesting for the rebranding of any Rajneesh-based trademarks to just Osho. His last public lecture had been in April of 1989, but he still sat publicly in his chair, silently observing and listening to his followers. Strangely, just before his death, Osho believed audience members were performing some sort of wicked magic toward him, but no guilty parties were ever found. At the age of 58, Osho died on January 19th, 1990, at the ashram in Pune, India. The cause of death was considered heart failure, while those at the ashram still blamed the US government for poisoning him. He was cremated, and his ashes were placed inside his brand new bedroom within the ashram.
Aggro.
Osho is still well known and widely published in the field of meditation and socio-political criticism. Internationally, Osho's movement has made a name for itself despite the decades of contention by outside and inside forces trying to stop him. His adherents have reinterpreted his contributions, essentially reshaping key ideas from his doctrine to make them more digestible and make them seem less divisive to newcomers. For the most part, at least in North American and European circles, Osho's teachings have been accommodated to encompass more spiritual practices involving yoga. According to Jeremy Corrett and Richard King in Selling Spirituality, The Silent Takeover of Religion, the Osho International Foundation, which reportedly generated between $15 and $45 million in the US in the year 2000, offers stress management seminars to businesses like IBM and BMW. Osho's ashram in Pune, India, has become the Osho International Meditation Resort, using a range of spiritual practices from many different traditions and markets. The ashram is described as a spiritual oasis where one can find themselves, a place to fuse the demands of the body and mind in a lovely vacation setting, if you're into that stuff. As for Osho and his legacy, a young death would immortalize him as a venerated spiritual leader who did nothing wrong. For the Rajneeshis, Osho's passing signified a new era of worship and a part of a larger plan that he foretold. In reality, Osho's stoic, peaceful approach to death was actually just a coping mechanism so that he himself could deal with the pain of life. Osho was, and never will be, a god, just a sad man who manipulated his way to get what he wanted. No different than the corruption he sought to destroy. He would find people's weakness and exploit it to keep them coming back for more. Besides money and freedom, America and the new city he donned served as a place where Osho could live out his god complex. What remains of Osho is his brand, an adoption of Eastern spirituality aesthetics, packaged neatly and sold to thousands of gullible people, ready to chew and swallow anything that helps them cope with trauma. Osho's life, teachings, and entire business model collapses once you realize that people are not fundamentally broken. They are simply looking for someone to tell them what to do and how to feel. If you made it to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you, because over the course of the last few years, this channel has changed quite a lot, and a lot of you may be confused. If you can't tell, I like taking risks on this platform. I'm always pivoting, evolving, and trying to challenge myself to make the sickest content possible. Whenever I have a large vision or something I want to accomplish, I always like to start by showing and not telling, because I don't want to throw something out there and not follow through. My goal with Third Eye Global is to turn it into the eventual engine of this channel. This way we don't have to rely on sponsors, ad revenue, nothing. We can take our time and perfect every single video. As the team grows and we have more hands on deck, we will absolutely be making Patreon exclusive content. So yeah, I'm just very, very excited, and I know that this is going to turn into something insane. My goal right now is to make the best documentary style content on the platform, and I'm not going to stop until we get there.
A gold. Not bad. I still cannot seem to remember to set in Stormwind. I'm going to try and do it this time.
Help you find something? See you around.
Alright. Let's go sell. Hey, when I ding 20, I will,
Light be with you. That makes for a lot fewer orcs to worry about, thanks. Blackrock Outrunners and Renegades are running ambushes between here and Stonewatch Keep. The leader of the Outrunners is an orc named Theral Zun. We want this orc. Bring me the head of Theral Zun.
ooh, damn. We want this orc.
The Blackrock orcs enlisted Shadowcasters to aid their attacks in Redridge, and they have brought with them devices of dark power, Midnight Orbs. These orbs have struck telling blows against Redridge's defenders, and it's imperative we remove the demon-tainted items from the conflict. Find and deliver to me Midnight Orbs from slain Blackrock Shadowcasters. I will then have them disposed of, for this world would be a better place without them.
Okay.
For the Alliance.
For the Alliance. Murloc poachers, huh? Alright. And now I'm 20. Cool. Got another point. Getting up that chart. Can't do dual wield specialization like I want to. I kind of want to cap out. Oh no, here we go. Endurance is now the next bit of total throughput that I can get with my levels, yeah. Yeah, I mean, impairment is nice that one time, but I don't really see that this is that valuable. I think this and this is more valuable. But for now, we go endurance because that lowers my sprint down to 4.25. A little bit faster. Evasion, the same. It'll go down to 3.5 minutes here. I like Fellini's good. I like this this video. This was really good. Thank you for the excellent content for my stream. Dread Pirate Roberts. Yeah. Lex Friedman. Let's look at this. This is brand new. Thank you, Bobby Broccoli, for the excellent content for my stream. I'd like to sub to your channel. This is called Sinking a Scandal, The Death of Nortel. As Canada's most valuable company, Nortel entered the 2000 with a boom. It would not survive the next decade.
Nebula for sponsoring this video. When the Edmund Fitzgerald launched in 1958, it was the largest ship.
Murlocs are becoming a problem. Just larger groups of the fishermen are dropping anchor along the shores of Lake Everstill and fishing up a storm. We need them gone before they eat all the fish in the lake. Hunt Murlocs. Bring me 8 of their fins and I might have something for you.
Okay. Ooh, can I use this for anything? Yeah, there's some gore. There's a bunch of stuff, yeah.
Of 730. The ship was named for Edmund Fitzgerald Sr., president of Northwestern Mutual out of Wisconsin, and spent 17 years hauling iron ore, setting its record of around 28,000 tons. Because of its imposing size and recognizable colors and the music it played over its speakers, the boat became a local legend on both sides of the US-Canada border, and earned it the nickname the Titanic of the Great Lakes. During its history, the ship was not without its close calls or minor accidents, but each time it survived and continued on its journeys. And then came November 10th of 1975. After spending a little over a day sailing east on Lake Superior, the Fitzgerald and another ship, the Anderson, began to enter into rough waters. With wind speeds reaching almost 80 kilometers per hour, the captain of the Fitzgerald radioed the Anderson to say, "I have a bad list, I've lost both radars, and I'm taking heavy seas over the deck." They lost radio contact at 7:10 p.m. Minutes later, the Fitzgerald entered into a squall, a highly localized black storm cloud, at which point it disappeared from the Anderson's radar, and the ship and its 29 crew members were never seen again. The wreck was found 4 days later, 500 feet below the surface, a dozen miles outside Whitefish Bay. It had been torn into 2
Whitefish
gigantic
Bay,
pieces.
goddamn.
The lifeboats hadn't been launched, suggesting that whatever took it down happened too fast to react. Although they're called the Great Lakes, their sheer size is such
Where
that
would
they're
you
more
like to fly
comparable to inland seas. Lake Superior is the largest of the 5, with enough volume to fit the other 4 lakes with room to spare. The weather conditions are often unpredictable and even violent. The waves on Lake Superior that day, particularly on the eastern side, reached an astonishing height of 11 meters. That's as tall as a 4-story house. With the Fitzgerald weighed down with 26,000 tons of cargo, water would have crashed down above the deck by over 4 meters. And although it's exceedingly rare, if the air pressure system was just right, a rapid frenzy of wind can generate a rogue wave over twice the height of the surrounding crests, a column of water so imposing that it would register on a ship's radar. The exact mechanics of the sinking to this day are unknown and widely disputed. Even the famous Gordon Lightfoot song captures the multiple possibilities with this lyric. They might have split up, or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. What exactly sank the Edmund Fitzgerald is a mystery that will never have just one satisfying answer. The best we can do is to analyze the wreckage and make our guesses.
Wow.
In April 1999, Nortel's general counsel, Clive Allen, dropped a bit of a bomb during a roadshow in Ohio. Now, Allen was set to retire in just over a month, and allegedly thought that his remarks would stay within his relatively small audience. He said that Nortel and other tech firms, quote, owe no allegiance to Canada, and alluded that Nortel may be considering a move to the States, unless the feds slashed his tax rates. Just because we were born there doesn't mean we'll remain there. Canadians shouldn't feel they own us. The comments from Alan
It's
were
true.
not well received by Canadians. One 72-year-old shareholder said his remarks were gratuitous and nasty, and that nowadays everybody just thinks of themselves. I feel what Alan said was very offensive. Nortel may not owe allegiance to Canada in a legal sense, but it certainly benefited from its close ties to Canada. It was collaborations with the National Research Council and grants and loans from the government that helped kickstart the microelectronics boom in Ottawa, and Nortel had enjoyed years of R&D tax credits. One estimate in 1993 pegged the total tax credits at around $880 million and would be well over $1 billion by Y2K. NAFTA was supposed to have evened the playing field, give Canada a chance to expand into the US. But between 1985 and 2002, there have been roughly 10,000 foreign takeovers of Canadian companies, 6,400 of which were by US
The
companies.
asteroid is
97% of the $140
15
billion
silver.
Canadian that had flowed into the country had been spent on foreign takeovers. Was Canada open for business, or was it up for sale? And now the one Canadian company that had broken that cycle was talking about abandoning them. No one wanted a repeat of the Quebec Nordiques moving to Colorado, only to go on to win the championship the very next year. The very idea that Nortel would move down south was insulting, but not unprecedented. 50% of Nortel's sales were in the US, compared to just 10% in Canada. The majority of its employees were now American. The recession years under Jean Monty had seen their fair share of Canadian plant closures and relocations. Bramalea, London, Amherst, Canada saw a quarter of its workforce cut, many of them unionized, in favor of the cheaper labor available in countries like Mexico and China. And since '97, Nortel had been spending less and less money on political donations in Canada, instead sending more money to Democrats and Republicans with each passing year. Following the controversial comments, John Roth had to go into damage control mode, saying that Allen, quote, communicated very poorly and was not authorized to speak on behalf of the company. Instead, John Roth tried to reframe the issue.
Well, the big issue is that there's a huge incentive for basically people in the upper income. And a lot of our jobs that we have in Nortel basically pay very well. And there's a huge tax differential now between the take-home pay that somebody would experience if they had that job performed in Canada versus they performed the job in the United States. And I think the government really has to pay attention to the fact that a lot of upper income jobs are moving to the US. And this is going to reduce the Canadian tax base in time, and it's going to basically impact the standard of living that we all enjoy here in Canada.
This wasn't about Nortel leaving to the US, but instead that Nortel was losing its best and brightest to US companies. On average, one Nortel manager a week was being poached by a US company in the year 2000. One Nortel executive was approached midway through his vacation in Greece and was flown out to Silicon Valley that day. They also offered to have his wife flown out so she could view a selection of hand-picked houses and see the various school districts. It doesn't matter that you work for the richest tech company in Canada. US tech has unfathomably deep pockets. One Silicon Valley recruiter explained it like this. Optical networking equipment is not something a couple of guys in a garage can create overnight. There is no one in the valley who knows how to do optical transport. We have to import all our guys. Canadian engineers were being offered huge raises, stock options, and yes, even hockey tickets. That last one does sound like a sweet deal on paper, but keep in mind the hockey team was probably the San Jose Sharks. I've been assured that this is a very funny sports joke. The company behind that particular stunt was Optical Networks, of which Cisco was an investor. And Nortel was so infuriated by its antics, they filed a court injunction to stop them from stealing their employees. It had poached 19 employees in 11 months. Worse, Nortel was alleging that those employees
Oh, I gotta
had been
train
targeted
and
because
shit
of their knowledge of trade secrets.
before I
The
do
last time
anything.
Canada experienced a brain drain like this was right after the Avro Arrow. When the project was shut down in 1959, rather than converting the plant to civilian aircraft, 14,000 of Canada's best engineers were unceremoniously laid off. Guess who benefited from that? Those Canadians immigrated down south and went on to play a not-so-minor role in the founding of a little organization called NASA. John Roth was arguing that this saga was
Welcome to the Bank of
in his
Stormwind.
eyes, it was no
We
wonder
offer
that
financial
highly
accounts and
educated
safety
Canadians
deposit
were immigrating
boxes for
down south.
valuable items.
They got higher
Do you already have an
salaries,
account
better
with us,
stock
ma'am?
options, and their taxes were lower. Highly paid tech workers would be unlikely to require things like public housing, and job offers from Silicon Valley companies often came with cushy private health insurance. If Canada wanted to keep those PhDs north of the border, then they obviously had to cut taxes. That was his argument, at least, but the validity of it is hard to evaluate. One study between 1997 and 2002 found that on average, 23,000 university-educated workers left Canada each year for the US job market. And in 1998, Statistics Canada confirmed that yes, a brain drain was occurring. However, it was small, much smaller than the one during the 50s and 60s, and more than offset by a brain gain from people immigrating to Canada by a factor of 4. And on top of that, a later study from 2013 found that this brain drain was often temporary, with around 50% of graduates who moved to the US later moving back to Canada. There are clearly some additional, harder to quantify variables at play here. But here's the thing. This is about a narrative, and John Roth had a narrative that the media loved. Nortel had ballooned so spectacularly that it was worth more than the rest of its own parent company, BCE. His quotes were being published every other week in newspapers. He was on TV talking about the brain drain. John Roth was not simply a Canadian CEO, he was the Canadian CEO. His rhetoric was being echoed by the leaders of the two conservative parties, who began to demand for further tax cuts. The culmination of this was a widely publicized feud with Finance Minister Paul Martin. The role of Finance Minister is generally one of the most sought-after cabinet positions, and Paul Martin was particularly influential. After coming in second behind Chrétien in the party leadership race, Martin had been biding his time ever since, stoking internal divisions within the party, and would successfully force out his boss in 2003. What this means is that John Roth was sparring with a future prime minister. Quote, Canadian taxes are too high. They are driving out top talent, the Gretzky's of high tech.
You look like the type I should watch my
Do I
coin
believe that
purse
some
on.
Rupture.
Something I can help
these
you
are the
with?
kind of people we should not lose? Yes. Do I believe that they leave because of taxes? No. As much as the government tried to
Oh,
argue
do I get a faster
politics
stealth?
is about politics. In February 2000, Paul Martin
Oh, it's
introduced
expensive,
what
but that's all right.
amounted to $58 billion in tax cuts and a significant overhaul to the tax bracket system. With an election becoming increasingly likely as the year dragged on, Paul Martin delivered a killing blow to the conservative platforms by unveiling a second mini-budget in October, which added even more cuts and
Rupture is
sped up
so
many of the
good.
changes promised in February. By one-upping the opposition on taxes and with healthcare as a further wedge issue, the Liberals cruised to another huge majority in November of that year. John Roth had gone toe-to-toe with the future Prime Minister, and he had won. For this saga, Time Canada named him Canadian Newsmaker of the Year. Although most Canadians were focused on changes to the middle tax bracket, for the John Roths out there, the real headline was the corporate tax rate, which would be dropped from 28% to just 21% over the next 5 years. Employee stock
It gets
options
faster.
also got a revamp.
A little
They now
bit
had a
faster.
built-in tax deferral clause, meaning you wouldn't owe taxes until you sold your shares. And of course, the capital gains tax, which as we saw last time contributed significantly to the Canadian stock craze. It started the year at 75%, but was down to 66% in February. This would have been the end of it, but then the Tory government of Ontario said, hey, we're going to lower ours to 50%. Not wanting to be outflanked on taxes in an election year, Paul Martin said, fine, we'll do it first. And so by October, he had slashed it again and brought it down to 50%, which is where it stands to this day. In a global financial market that was so often dominated by American companies, John Roth had done everything he could to level the playing field. But still, Nortel lacked
Welcome to
one
my
key trick
weary
that
traveler.
Lucent
What can
and
I do for
Cisco
you?
had access to.
Safe travels.
And John Roth had a plan for that as well.
Analog and DFT, how much better can it be? Anesthetic on the floor, I can take it anymore.
I don't think I want to pay this anymore.
To understand the root of Nortel's problems, you have to go back to a PR incident in late 1998. See this plunge in price? It was caused by 12 words. The recent Bay Networks purchase was not an immediate slam dunk. The company had not been without its own issues. It had been formed from the merger of two other
The
tech
asteroid
companies who had
is
overlapping
depleted.
product lines, and some of its senior employees had jumped ship. At $9.1 billion, many observers thought that Nortel had way overpaid. And by fall 1998, it wasn't clear if Bay was
The
helping
asteroid
Nortel's cash
is
flow.
depleted.
Nortel had just released some earnings numbers that didn't factor in the Bay purchase, even though the two companies had already merged. At their annual investor meeting in late September, Nortel's then CFO, Wes Scott, got up on stage to try and clear up the confusion. Referring to their projected annual growth of 14%, he said something to the effect
These
of,
great
in the high
beasts
teens
know
with
paths
Bay
that you
included,
can't find
and
on
low
foot.
teens
They'll get
without
you
Bay.
there fast and
Technically,
maybe show you
this was
something
not
new at
new
the same
information.
time.
And yet he hadn't even finished his sentence, and a room of 500 people had entirely vacated. All the analysts had left to tell anyone who would listen to cash out of Nortel and to do it fast. In the days that followed, Nortel lost 20%, or $9 billion Canadian in value. Since announcing the Bay purchase, they were down by 50%. One audience member remarked, it was only 12 words. That works out to $750 million per word. It was a hard lesson for Nortel. This stock price crater had undone basically all the gains that had been made under John Roth's tenure as CEO. He was approaching his threshold. The lesson here was that frank honesty is bad for the stock price. You gotta give investors only what they want to hear. Wes Scott was booted from the CFO role early the next year. He would be replaced by Frank Dunn, a longtime ally of John Roth. From this incident onwards, Nortel would concoct a new type of financial reporting: earnings from operations. I already know that for most of you watching this, your eyes just glossed over. I get it. It sounds like an Econ 101 term, something straight out of an accounting textbook. But it's deceptive. These 3 specific words, in this specific order, is not something you can find in a textbook. It's an invention entirely unique to Nortel, a smokescreen that hid just how bad things were from investors. So there's this thing in the US called GAAP, right? Generally accepted accounting principles. Essentially, a big group of accountants, the FASB, come together and make a set of standardized rules for reporting a company's finances. It makes it so you can compare different companies on a level playing field and helps investors make informed decisions. It's not technically a law, but if you're a publicly traded company, the SEC can issue fines if you don't follow GAAP, and even private companies tend to follow it so they can get loans from banks. Now, Canada at this time had its own version of GAAP. Nortel, which was owned by a Canadian parent company at the time, was required to follow Canadian GAAP, which was frustrating for Nortel because it meant they couldn't take advantage of the highly controversial Opinion 16, aka the pooling rule. When you buy a company, you're paying for 2 types of assets: tangibles and intangibles. Tangible assets would be physical stuff, like offices, factories, equipment, employees, stuff that has a clear dollar value. The intangibles, though, are harder to quantify. This might be brand recognition, customer relationships, or in this new exciting .com era, the future potential of R&D. If I buy a company for $10 million, but they only have $3 million in tangible assets, that means I paid a premium of $7 million. This premium is called goodwill, and goodwill has to be recognized.
Thank you for making the long journey. This is indeed important information. If I did not know Magistrate Solomon personally, I would say the man has gone mad. Send the Night Watch to Lakeshire because Stormwind refuses aid? The Night Watch was formed because Stormwind left us when this foul magic seeped into the land. If I sent my Night Watch, this town would be overrun by evil before the guards even reached the forest's edge. Take this letter of response to your master in Lakeshire. For the Alliance.
Where would you like to fly to? Safe travels. Where would you like to fly to? Where would you like to fly to? See you around.
Your revenues as a rapidly depreciating asset. Here's where the controversy comes in. Way back in 1970, the FSAB had drafted Opinion 16, a rule that dictated how companies report expenses after a merger. When 2 companies of equal size merge together, say Exxon and Mobil, they take all their shares and combine them into one big pool. The assets have been combined, no money has traded hands, and so it doesn't count as goodwill. However, by the 90s, corporations realized that the pooling rule could be abused. It didn't just work for a merger of 2 equals. It could be applied to one company buying another. A big company prints new shares and swaps them with the employees in the same. There is no
Your skill has increased.
here. Shares have traded hands, but because those employees were now part of the big company, the pooling rule technically applied. As long as you paid with shares instead of cash, the pooling rule effectively made the acquisition free. It was like Goodwill never existed. Now, the FFXI wasn't dumb. They realized what was happening and wanted to scrap pooling as early as 1996. The problem was that they faced intense lobbying efforts from tech companies, who sunk millions into the pockets of Republicans and Democrats, particularly in California. The tech sector sunk around $40 billion in political contributions in just the year 2000. Despite this, the FASB continued to fight back, and eventually managed to get the pooling rule scrapped, a change that would take effect on January 1st of 2002. Of the big three telecom companies, only Cisco could make use of pooling, and it took advantage every chance it got. Nortel couldn't because it was stuck following Canadian GAAP, and Lucent couldn't until late 1998. This was a condition of its spin-off from AT&T.
What can I do for you?
That it couldn't
By the
use
light!
pooling for
The Stormwind Army
You can
retreated
see how
from
this would be
Westfall.
endlessly
The
frustrating
Guard
for
no
Nortel
longer
users.
protects Darkshire?
Just 3 months
There is
after
some
their ban
treachery
on pooling
abound.
expired,
How could this be so?
Lucent made its first
Oh, I
major
forgot to
purchase
reward your
in
service,
January
adventurer.
1999.
Here are some coins.
Send
Now, excuse me.
communications.
Something
Now,
is
it was
amiss
just
in
Nortel
Stormwind,
without
and I
free
must get to the
money
bottom of
glitch.
it.
So what did Nortel do? They did it anyway. The thing is, there is nothing preventing a company from publishing their GAAP numbers and then also publishing a different set of numbers that make their company look better. So long as you clearly define which ones are GAAP and which ones aren't, there is nothing illegal about that. You could bury them in the fine print, or you could publish your annual report on a big news day so no one
Well
pays
met.
attention. This
Well
type of
done,
creative
adventurer.
accounting
Such
ruined
fine
the
specimens too.
entire
And here is your delicious delicacy known as Red Ridge Goulash.
100. Okay. Oh, I should buy food. Yeah, I'm learning that food is an expense now. I'd rather buy from the vendor than worry about cooking it or any of that. I could catch it, I suppose. Could catch some food, but... Thangor. I don't want this on my... Yeah, I don't want this on my list until way later. That was expensive, damn it. Ugh. That's okay, I'd rather have them than not. It was expensive, but I can always make more money.
Bubble. You had startups worth billions of dollars on the stock market and yet had no products and no revenues. They were just offices with a few computers, a website, maybe a foosball table. The 1990s were the wild west of investing, and it became almost impossible for financial analysts, much less the average person, to decipher the dozens of different GAAP versus non-GAAP numbers. It was like apples versus oranges versus prime rib steaks. To be clear, what Nortel was about to do was not unique, and it was not illegal. Nortel was just doing it at an unimaginable scale. And so, under the new CFO Frank Dunn, Nortel released their annual report for 1998. In it, the cost of the Bay Network's buyout was simply not factored in to the headline numbers. Buried at the bottom were GAAP numbers. What would have been a $569 million loss under GAAP was a $1 billion profit under Nortel's nonsense numbers. Here's another headline. Revenues up 22%, up to $4.4 billion. But buried at the end of the paragraph is the GAAP number. The quarter actually saw a loss of $470 million. As Nortel continued to buy around one new company a month, their financial situation continued to worsen. Paying a premium in shares costs way more than paying with cash. Shares are inherently more risky. Their value can go up and down at the drop of a hat. A company about to be bought out is going to demand a big premium. Qterra, for instance, had been valued at around $68 million the year prior, only to be bought by Nortel for $3 billion. I have a hard time believing they went up in value 40 times in just 1 year. Of the nearly $22 billion spent on goodwill, only $450 million of it was paid using cash. One estimate by analyst Al Rosen says that if they had paid with cash, Nortel could have saved $13.4 billion. Were these acquired companies even profitable? Were they bringing in new revenue? Nortel made it impossible to tell.
Aggro.
They weren't kept as distinct subsidiaries. They were absorbed in the existing corporate structure. Their revenues all mixed together in an opaque sludge. And the acquisitions were hardly efficient. Many product lines overlapped. Nortel now had 2, maybe 3 divisions working on competing products. Of course, all of this doesn't matter so long as the stock price goes up. As we saw earlier, Nortel's already distorted presence on the Toronto Stock Exchange allowed it to exploit these buyouts to further inflate its share price. As long as the stock stayed steady and the orders from customers kept coming in, they would never feel the cost of those acquisitions. And here's the kicker. Executive bonuses weren't paid according to GAAP numbers. They were paid according to Nortel's custom accounting. By selling his shares in August 2000, John Roth cashed out for $36 million. If we go by his yearly salary, it would have taken him 30 years to earn what he had just made in 1 day of trading. In the 4 years he was CEO of Nortel, he raked in around $130 million. And during his 4 years as Nortel's CEO, Nortel hadn't posted a single profit.
Aggro.
I gather the results might have been better if you've been able to fulfill more orders. How are you going to deal with those bottlenecks?
Well, we were working that very aggressively, as you might imagine. This is one of the problems you'd like to have from time to time, but we don't want it to last too long.
Success a nightmare? It may seem that way if you don't have the right tools to handle it.
The dot-com bubble had burst on March 28th, 2000. All those internet startups had finally burned through their venture capital money. The tech-heavy NASDAQ index begins to plummet. That year, 14 dot-com companies ran Super Bowl ads for around $2 billion each. And later that year, 2/3 of those same companies went bankrupt. The business models never took off, and only the most hardened players, the Amazons, the eBays, managed to stick around. Logically, you would think that when the dot-com bubble burst, the telecom bubble would immediately follow. But that's not quite what happened. Just because a bunch of California yuppies in their parents' garages couldn't put together a business plan doesn't mean the sky is falling. The Nortels, the Ciscos, the Lucents were planning for the future here. Just like the race to build the early cross-continental railroads, this was a race to install the world's fiber optic networks. If you build it, they will come. People were still going to need the internet. The three-way race continued well into the summer. By July, there were rumors of yet another massive buyout. Nortel was in talks to acquire Corning. Corning is the company when it comes to glass. They were the ones who made the glass for Thomas Edison's light bulb. These days, they were known for mass-producing the thin strands of glass used to transmit binary laser pulses, fiber optic cables. The magnitude of this deal cannot be overstated. It wasn't meant to be, however. Rumors of the deal caused Nortel's stock price to rocket up even higher, causing Corning's investors to panic, and the deal was abandoned. This is the absolute peak that Nortel will reach. $124.50. They will never get back above this line. Go ahead and take in the view, because it will only last a few weeks. Nortel had spent the past year as the darling of the Canadian stock market, but if you go looking for them, you can find a handful of Nortel skeptics who predicted the inevitable fall with stunning accuracy. Al Rosen had been one of the first to raise the alarm bell on the earnings from operations nonsense, and he advised his clients to stay well away from Nortel. Ross Healy was notable for going on live TV and predicting a drop to $8 per share by September. But it was Paul Sagawa who truly understood the danger that Nortel was in. He had spent months talking to dozens of telecom companies, asking anyone who would pick up the phone. The answers he got didn't just spell doom and gloom for Nortel, they predicted a black cloud for the entire telecom sector in 2001. The demand for internet traffic was growing, absolutely, but nowhere near the levels that market analysts were pulling out of their asses. One consulting firm predicted that between 1999 and 2003, you'd see traffic go from 350,000 terabits to 15 million. That is a 10 times increase per year, 4 years in a row. Author Douglas Hunter points out that the telecom industry was a near perfect analog to the race between British railway companies in the early 1800s. Companies often ran parallel tracks to the same destinations, but there simply weren't enough passengers to use all of them. What happened next was mass bankruptcy and consolidation of the rail industry into just a few powerful players. Nortel was still the darling of Bay and Wall Street, but its detractors had begun to knock a few dollars off its share price by fall. And when its share price slumped, Nortel had to slow down on its acquisition spree. After closing 2 more deals in early October, there wouldn't be another for several months. But John Roth was defiant as ever. It isn't that Nortel was overvalued, it's maybe that everything else is undervalued. Late October was critical for Nortel. Investors were eagerly awaiting their third quarter numbers, and hopes were high. But October 25th turned out to be a disastrous day. Nortel was going to miss analyst expectations by 1 cent per share. It was an underperformance just barely below expectations, but the market is unforgiving. Nortel loses $80 billion in one day. The
30
TSE
silver
has its
down.
worst day in 13 years because of it. So many Nortel shares are being traded that it brings down the TSE's computer systems, and traders have to go to Wall Street instead. By the end of the week, $120 billion had been simply erased into existence, and Nortel fell from 32% to just 24% of the TSE 300. Autumn was a chilly wake-up call after a blistering hot summer season. October 25th is the biggest
I like this
single-day
guy.
loss in Nortel's history. But as dire as that sounds and looks, it was not the end of the world. It's important to take a moment and get some perspective. This graph is so warped, so blown out of scale, that every number that isn't this one feels like a colossal failure. But every time that Nortel has fallen down in the past, its stock has climbed its way back up. Think about how the people who bought the dip in 1993 feel now. If you bought here, Jean Monty quadrupled your shares by the time he left. And if you bought the dip in 98, John Roth multiplied your shares by 9 times. Do you still doubt it? Are you going to miss out again? Individual investors loaded up again. Pension plans loaded up. Nortel was nothing if not resilient. You couldn't say the same for Lucent, who'd spent much of their fourth quarter of 2000 stepping on a bunch of rakes. They revised their earning predictions twice, down from 24 to 18 cents per share, losing them almost $8 from their stock price. Because of this, CEO Richard McGinn was fired by the board. Then on November 21st, they admitted that they overstated their sales by $125 million, lopping another 2 cents per share from their targets. Can you imagine that? You have thousands of accountants and you can't even get your own numbers right? Embarrassing. Since late September, it had lost 56% of its value, dragging down Nortel and Cisco with it. During the same period, Nortel was down 48% and Cisco 36%. It was bad news for all telecom companies, but Lucent had fallen a long way since a record-setting IPO. It had tried to grow too much, too fast. All those companies that had gobbled up to Nortel and Cisco were being ejected again. It had spun off 2 major divisions as Avaya and Azure Systems. Nortel was smugly watching by as Lucent tripped over its own feet. If this was still a race, it was now only between Nortel and Cisco. On November 30th, John Roth was given the honor of ringing the bell that signaled the start of the trading day on Wall Street. Although it tends to be an honor given to American CEOs, that day was Nortel's 25th anniversary of being listed on Wall Street. John Roth gave a speech there that day, and given the circumstances, he was well within his rights to be a little petty.
The asteroid is
we grew
depleted.
40% this year. We'll grow 30 to 35% next year. A lot of people would like to have that problem. Nortel does not have a problem. This infamous quote would haunt Nortel for years to come. By the end of December, John Roth had been awarded Canadian Newsmaker of the Year, as well as Canadian CEO of the Year. The stock recovered over the holidays thanks to an overall market rally in the new year, and it seemed that Paul Sagala's prophecy of disaster had been oversold. But then, Cisco blinked. In January, CEO John Chambers had finally spoken into existence the words that every investor feared. Quote, "Is the economy slowing? Absolutely. For Cisco, the first quarter of 2001 was going to be, quote, a little more challenging." Cisco wasn't ringing any alarm bells yet, but it was clear that they weren't going to promise the moon either. But on February 6th, Cisco completely threw in the towel. It announced to investors that it would be only 1 cent less per share than initially. Their stock price is pummeled and loses 20% in just a few days. By April, it was down by half.
Docking permission
Meanwhile, in the
requested.
background, Nortel had just quietly cut 4,000 jobs. There is no official public statement. It's not until January 10th that the media hears rumors of job losses at Nortel.
Docking request
At which point,
accepted.
Nortel unleashes a PR offensive. Any sales deal or new customer was broadcasted by the PR team. Didn't matter how small the deal was, any good news was championed like a monumental saving grace. To quote analyst Ross Healy, it was like the Hudson's Bay Company reporting the sale of every 31-inch television set. There was so much good news pouring out that bad news had no room to breathe. Then for good measure, a Nortel spokesperson says the reporting of layoffs is exaggerated. You see, they're cutting jobs in slower divisions so that they can hire more in faster-growing divisions. If you think about it, by the end of the year, we'll have hired back the same number of people. Those aren't layoffs. That's just strategic reallocation. The spin seemed to work, and the markets rewarded Nortel by stopping their slide. 2001 Nortel was going to be meaner and leaner. But then, there were some disturbing reports. One internet company, ICG Communications, had just declared bankruptcy. Although there was no public record of any specific dollar amount deal with Nortel, Nortel had been listed as one of their technological partners. Soon after, Bookham Technologies announces that they're reducing orders from Nortel. On its own, it's a neutral statement. Maybe Nortel had found a better supplier. But enough about that. We've got a major piece of good news again. Another acquisition. The first since the October crash. Nortel was buying a laser division for undersea fiber optics from JDSU. $2 billion worth of shares. The deal is set to close on February 13th. The news that would come just 2 days later would trigger several class action lawsuits. Earlier in February, there had been a meeting in North Carolina. The CFO, Frank Dunn, is in attendance. He's getting updates from division heads on their sales forecasts. The first to speak was Greg Mumford. Sales are slowing down in the optical division. Frank is momentarily shaken. Then he lets other people speak. Wireless, it's going down. Enterprise, down. Everything is going down. Quest, MCI, all of their customers that
I remember MCI,
business
WorldCom, and all that.
Orders because they lack the money. Most of those deals have been done using vendor financing. Nortel promised deep discounts and loans in exchange for their business, but they couldn't even pay for those. And yet Nortel had already reported those as sales, even though they hadn't been paid for yet. Nortel switches were sitting in warehouses, still on the pallets they were delivered on, with nowhere.
Can't wait for cheap
By
shot.
some estimates, these heavy-duty fiber networks were only supporting 7 to 14% of their total capacity. There just wasn't enough internet activity to warrant the existing orders, much less any new ones. Nortel was about to drive off a cliff. Scratch that. They had run off the cliff months ago. This was the moment where Wile E. Coyote looks down and he realizes he's about to fall. Stunned silence. How had they missed this? How had no one seen this coming? In reality, lower-level managers in Nortel had known about this problem for months. In San Diego, September 2000, Tim Dempsey, an HR exec, was running a leadership workshop. All of the managers are pulling him towards their table and begging him to listen. You gotta tell John. Tell John what exactly? The marketing numbers aren't real. What's fake exactly? Peel the layers and you'll see that the assumptions
Oh my God.
will buy networks from each of our customers. End users only need one network each. All the numbers are inflated. These warnings never made it to John. Instead, they were suffocated by the rigid bureaucracy of the management hierarchy. John Roth had surrounded himself and stuffed the board with yes men. While he was busy telling investors what they wanted to hear, his own executives were doing the same to him. Dave House, the former CEO of Big Networks, only stuck around at Nortel for about a year before he left. But after just 6 weeks, he shared with Tim Dempsey his opinion on the rot that infected Nortel. I have never seen a bigger group of liars in my life. I'm astounded that you don't tell each other the truth. There's a culture here to lie to each other, to protect your turf, protect your ego, to protect your business, to protect your customer relationships. To protect what? I don't know. But you don't tell each other the truth. In this moment, Frank Dunn doesn't understand all this. He just knows he has to make a phone call. John Roth is not in the building. He's not even on the same continent. John Roth would later describe the shock of the news as compared to when he first heard about the attack on the World Trade Center later that year. A press release was being drafted and would go public in a little over a week. On February 8th, Nortel's CTO, William
Damn, you stole mine.
cashing in his stock options, and was mostly at a loss. He sees the writing on the wall. Soon, Don Smith, president of Optical Internet Solutions, also leaves. Nortel won't publicly mention these departures until afterward. On February 15th, it seems like just another trading day.
That's right, draw aggro while I throw at you. Yeah.
Incident
Oh, it wasn't
at 4
mine.
p.m.
Oh, it wasn't mine.
Just minutes after the closing bell, though, internet trading forums start going berserk.
Ox galore.
They've just been fucked. Nortel has issued a press release, and they've changed their forecast. Nortel was not going to hit its target. That much was clear. When Nortel missed their earnings by just 1 cent per share last October, They lost 25% of their stock price in one day. When Cisco missed their earnings by 1 cent per share, the market slaughtered them. And of course, Lucent had their traumatic fall from grace when they had to lop off 2 cents per share, and their stock was nearly cut in half. The question was, where in this range will Nortel's correction be? Nortel's original target was earnings of 16 cents per share. And this was their correction.
Aggro.
They didn't just underperform, their projected gain had turned into a projected loss. The next day, so many Nortel shares are dumped that it crashes the Toronto Stock Exchange several times. Nortel was cut by 33%. $44 billion is just gone. The Financial Times summed it up in just one sentence. It's a wonder there is any red ink left in Canada.
Nortel, then no idea.
We've known for some time that job cuts were coming, but we didn't know where.
Now we do. Today, Nortel Networks announced 950 more layoffs in Canada, 750 right here in Ottawa.
Robert, more than half of Canada's 24,000 Nortel employees work here in the capital region. And tonight, most of them are in the dark.
At first, it starts slow. Last November had small layoffs. Employees assumed it was just routine, the bottom 5% being cut loose. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was only fair. Now, though, rating systems began to emerge. Everyone had to be ranked on a scale of 1 to 5, but there was no minimum threshold for you, no level of productivity that could save you. Someone had to be a number 1. Someone always had to be at the bottom. And then the paranoia sets in. You don't want to be. You need to set yourself apart. Maybe you're the laser guy in the office. That's your thing. Before, you probably would have taught the new guy the basics, get him up to speed. It would make your job easier. But now, that would just make you replaceable, disposable. That's your thing. You need that to be your thing, because hoarding knowledge is the only thing that's going to save you from being a number 1. Initially, Nortel had begun announcing layoffs based on location, but soon, that stopped. Instead of knowing up front, you simply had to wait and see. One man had packed up his things and moved from Vancouver to Ottawa for a job offer, only to find out it had been rescinded by the time he got there. Before the bubble, Nortel had several divisions like Extreme Voice, Extreme Data. If your group had Extreme in the name, it was almost guaranteed you were gone. Nortel was riddled with bloat. The acquisition spree had been made hastily and without any concern for overlapping product lines. You might have 2 or even 3 competing teams whose products overlapped, and only one would ever make it to market. Tim Dempsey recalls an HR exec bragging at a meeting that Nortel was world-class at downsizing, like it was something to be proud of, that Cisco's refusal to downsize was a weakness. People would congregate in the bathrooms just to talk about who might be next. Employees would avoid being at their desk out of fear of having the phone ring, of seeing their manager's name show up on caller ID. One day you'd look in the calendar and see a huge meeting room booked by your manager and someone from HR you didn't recognize. It would always be scheduled at a weird